Be visiting a cattle burial ground with my friend, Maksimich. We came here to collect maggots in a tin to use for bait for fishing. The maggots here are better than anywhere else and are the best for fishing. The place smelled so bad it was enough to turn you inside out. I had thoughtfully grabbed an old scarf from home and soaked it in cologne. It was the least I needed to survive the smell. It was hot and stuffy holding it over my nose, but I would rather sweat than smell the carrion stench. Maksimich did not care. He hopped around the ravine like a grasshopper, collecting maggots in a tin. Maksimich was a deft hand with the tweezers. He had half a jar of them in no time. He was actually a biology teacher at a school. I was a principal at the same school. I couldn't do it as quickly as him. I picked up each worm slowly because I was worried about messing it up. Wandering leisurely through the ravine, I found myself next to the remains of our former livestock specialist's horse. The horse had died early in that spring. Now all that remained was a skeleton, covered in patches of dried skin in places. Even fly maggots had nothing to eat here. I spotted movement deep in the empty eye socket. I bent down, took a closer look, and then shuddered. Something whitish, the size of a sausage, was moving inside the horse's skull. I told Mac to come and take a look. This was the mother of all maggots and a great find. Maksimich slowly approached and slid his gaze along my outstretched arm. He looked at me for a long time. He told me that it's impossible for maggots to grow that big. He insisted that it must be something else, maybe even a big beetle. He said that he had never seen anything like it and rushed to pick it up with the tweezers. He stuck a pair of tweezers into the horse's eye socket, snagged the unknown creature, and pulled it out into the light of day. I caught a glimpse of a hideously writhing, translucent body, topped with a dark, cone-shaped head. The next second, the larva abruptly twisted, and the cone at the front end of its body opened like an umbrella. It was transforming into a multitude of sharp mandibles that immediately pierced the base of Maksimich's thumb. With a gasp, my colleague dropped the tweezers and the jar containing his catch. He began shaking his hand furiously, trying to dislodge the vile creature. I was confused and dumbfounded. Under other circumstances, this would have been hilarious, but at that moment, I was genuinely afraid for him. Finally, the worm or whatever broke free and plopped into the grass. Maksimich looked in bewilderment at the numerous pinpoint wounds arranged in a circle on his arm. The wounds appeared to be quite deep, but surprisingly, the blood coagulated very quickly. I was seriously worried. Being bitten by a worm unknown to science is unpleasant enough, but if that worm feeds on carrion and has already managed to inject a poison into your blood, it's doubly unpleasant. I told him that we should quickly see the school paramedic, Anna. I told him the last thing he needed was disease or blood poisoning. He agreed, but said that we should find the thing to take with us. I was like, what the fuck? Why? I asked if one bite was not enough. He started going on about how it could be a new discovery, a new bug no one had ever seen. Crazy-ass biologist. Personally, I would have just crushed it. He asked where the thing fell and started looking through the grass with a stick. After a while, he exclaimed that he found it and told me to pass him his jar. I emptied the jar and handed the empty one to Mac. He managed to get it in without being bitten this time and tied a handkerchief around the neck of the thing. After that, we got out of the forest. We took a shortcut which passed through a clearing and brought us to a cemetery. Mac asked me to stop for a break since he was out of breath. That and he wanted to smoke. I was a little worried that maybe he was feeling ill from the bite, but he assured me he was just out of shape. He rested up on a bench for like 10 minutes just near a grave. I could not do anything but nervously pace around and keep bugging him about whether the bite hurt or not. He wasn't worried in the slightest, just kept shaking his head before telling me to give it a rest. After a while, he said he felt good enough to go on, and he got up and started walking. I just followed him out, and we walked pretty much in silence all the way back to our village. Right next to the first aid station, he stopped and took a tin can out of his pocket to see how his new species was doing. About a second later, he was shouting about how it was gone and must have escaped. He said the thing must have chewed a hole through the jar and run away. I thought he was joking until he showed me the empty jar. The only reminder of the biting worm's recent presence was a faint smell of decay. I told him his capture was a disaster and laughed. I wasn't concerned at all about the thing. Sure, it was weird, and I was worried about illness, but as for a new discovery, yeah, I didn't really buy that. Probably some rare worm thing that we've never heard of that bites people. Mac might be a biologist, but he's not exactly the sanest person that I know. I did feel bad though. He actually convinced himself he discovered a creature unknown to science. After a little time, he did not seem too sad. He was either masking it or decided it was fine. I again insisted that we needed to go to the nurse though. Maximich climbed the steps and disappeared through the medical center doors. The bite on his arm healed unusually quickly. There weren't even any complications. That's what I was thinking right then. After that incident, we often visited the burial ground for bait. Each time, with a meticulousness worthy of Sherlock Holmes, I examined every skull, every bone, and every scrap of rotted skin. I was hoping to find another giant worm, but to no avail. Perhaps it truly was a unique relic, or even a mutant, or a single specimen existing on Earth. Surprisingly, Maximich did not support me in this search at all. He had completely lost all interest in the lost find, and even recalled it reluctantly, as if talking about it was unpleasant. I noticed that in the months since that memorable day, my friend had changed significantly. I did not recognize the old Maximich. The new one was unusually silent and indifferent to everything that was going on. Going fishing with him became insanely boring. He would simply cast his line and stare blankly at the float. Then when I'd tell him something or try to start a conversation, he would either agree wholeheartedly or offer brief comments. Once, I even chided him, "You're like some kind of zombie," but Maximich merely shrugged and blamed it on getting old. I mean, that could be it, but it was also quick. Maximich was supposed to turn 60 this fall. Maybe a midlife crisis, or a three-quarter life crisis, I don't know. Fast forward to the end of summer for this next part. It was the last 10 days of August. I was completely overwhelmed by endless tasks piled on me regarding the upcoming school year. I stepped out onto the school porch and watched the poplar leaves fall. Then, Aunt Shkilieka ran up to me. I told her good afternoon, but needed to wait for her to catch her breath. I asked why she was so out of sorts and if something had happened. She immediately broke out into a kind of rant. She started waving her hands and telling me not to make fun of her, that it really happened. I was like, what the fuck? What happened? She told me she was running from the cemetery. She didn't even continue, just kept panting again, and I was getting kinda impatient. She finally started telling me what happened at the cemetery. This girl called Inga, the daughter of the late Olga Vostrikova, showed up. She was there to move her mom's coffin back to the city. I think the exhumation was to move her to the city, so it was easier for her to visit. Tons of men showed up from the city. I think it's like a very regulated process. Anyway, then she starts telling me how they fell into the grave. Huh, okay. They said they were digging and just lost their footing. But when the men fell down and they took a look at the grave, it was empty. I was like, what the fuck do you mean empty? She says the coffin was smashed to bits and there was no body in there. The men who slipped in were shocked. They said it looked like someone dug up from underneath and dragged the corpse out. I chuckled in disbelief. She gets angry. You don't believe me? You think the old woman is lying? Go to the cemetery and talk to Inga. She actually felt sick when she saw the empty grave. I told her I believed her, just to keep her quiet. I asked if anything else happened. Then she drops another bomb on me. Grandma Yegorovna has disappeared. I told her that's not possible. She would never just disappear. I said that Mac told me himself she had a niece in the city, so she is probably visiting her. She just gives me this wide-eyed stare. She doesn't have any nieces. She is completely alone. I am telling you, she has disappeared. She went into the forest, and that was the end of her days. Her unburied body is probably lying somewhere in the swamp, God forgive me. I was like, what the fuck? Of all of the explanations, why are you insisting on the most disturbing? She took offense, and told me that I would see that she is right. Yeah, not ominous at all. I just went back to work. That evening, it turned out that the story about Vostrikova's grave, where she died of cancer in the early spring, was absolutely true. The coffin was indeed destroyed and completely empty. Inga returned to town in tears and bewilderment. Theories poured in from all sides, with the most popular among the villagers being the theory that the body had been stolen by a sect of Satanist necrophiles. I dismissed such nonsense outright. The only thing that came to mind was the idea of some living organisms, like mold or bacteria, must be capable of destroying a corpse completely, leaving not even bones. I asked Maksimich if such a thing was possible, but he merely shrugged, briefly remarking that anything was possible. It started raining overnight. It poured all the next day too. Once it finally stopped, it turned out that several more relatively new graves had collapsed due to subsidence in the cemetery. No one saw anything unusual about this. The relatives of the deceased banded together, piled more soil on top, straightened the twisted crosses, and called it a day. There wasn't much else they could do. Soon, a series of misfortunes befell our village. On August 24th, Stepan Vyatkin and his grown-up lazy son, Semyon, drowned. They had gone fishing that morning and just never returned. Those who went looking for them found their belongings on the shore, and their inflatable boat in the coastal bushes. Both father and son, it should be noted, were avid drinkers. That's why no one in the village was surprised by their tragic end. Everyone agreed that the Vyatkins had had a drink, dozed off, and then tumbled into the water. Our village waited for their bodies to surface, but they never did. Exactly 2 days later, the house of the lonely elderly Patrikievs burned down, along with the owners. It burned clean, leaving only embers. No bodies were found this time either. Apparently, only ashes remained of them. On the 28th, a local idiot named Volusia Ivanova disappeared. No one paid much attention to it, as she was 27 years old and had a habit of periodically leaving with logging truck drivers. If you believe the rumors, she was popular among them, so no one worried. She always returned, whether it took a day or a week. On the night between the 31st and the 1st, a new fire broke out. This time, it was at the house of the paralyzed Elena Gulyanko. Her perpetually drunk daughter, Mashka, could not clearly explain why she had gone out at 2 in the morning, but when she returned, the house was already ablaze. It was not extinguished until the morning. A blackened skull was found among the smoldering embers, and was all that remained of Elena's body. Knowledge Day, the day school starts in Russia, passed by joylessly and chaotically. The recent events had hit the village hard. Fortunately, the 2nd and 3rd of September fell on weekends. I hoped to unwind a bit during these days, before diving into the whirlwind of school life. Saturday morning dawned overcast, but dry and warm. I grabbed a bucket and headed into the forest, hoping to pick mushrooms. It didn't really matter though. I just wanted to temporarily escape the hustle and bustle of life. I really needed to clear my head. I invited Maksimich to come along, but he declined. I wandered the forest for half a day and found pretty much nothing. I was already heading toward the village when I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. I saw a familiar white cap. It was Maksimich. What an old devil, huh? He told me he had high blood pressure, but he still went off into the forest. I could see he was heading somewhere in the direction of Pruzikovsky Bog. I yelled his name. Maksimich instantly froze. He almost jumped from surprise. He turned his head in all directions. I shouted and was like, "Yo, it's me," and I started running towards him. I was cursing under my breath because of the spruce branches hitting me in the face. I finally caught up and was like, "You didn't tell me you were better." He was just absent-mindedly like, "Hello, yeah," it just kinda went away in a flash. Then he decided he would take a walk in the woods and maybe run into me. Maksimich had a large, but obviously empty backpack hanging over his shoulder, and a large homemade knife dangling from his belt. I asked if he was headed to the swamp, and if so, why the hell was he doing that? To the swamp, Maksimich nodded. "I have some business there. If you want, come with me." I thought, fuck it, why not? We walked in silence. The paths to the swamp were untrodden. The road, though short, was not easy, and there was no time for conversation. We were busy swatting away mosquitoes and brushed cobwebs from our faces. About 15 minutes later, I heard a squelching sound underfoot. Then we emerged at a small forest lake, reeking of stagnant water and rotting mud. The trunk of the aspen tree closest to the water was tied with 2 ropes. The end of the ropes were extended into the water. "Are you soaking something there?" I asked. Maximich nodded and dropped his backpack to the ground. It jingled, so it wasn't empty after all. He told me to stay here for a while. Practically ordered me, in fact. He began spitting into his palms and picking up one of the rope ends. Judging by his noisy breathing, the bulging veins in his neck, and his flushed face, there was something quite heavy stored in the pool. I was about to offer my help when a large, elongated object appeared in the water. Maximich gave it a couple more tugs, and I'd always thought the phrase "not believing your eyes" was just a figure of speech, but Maximich convinced me in an instant that such things happen. At first, I truly found it hard to believe this was all happening. A naked woman's body lay on the shore, tied by the ankles. It looked like it had been in the water for more than a day. It was swollen, covered in a network of greenish, cadaverous spots and a film of mud. It was also swarming with water fleas. The sight was so monstrous, so unbearable, that I felt sick. I swayed but stayed on my feet, and even found the strength not to puke up my morning breakfast. All I could say was, "Maximich, what the fuck? What is this?" I could not believe his response. It was like there was an alien in place of him. This is food. You see, Vitya, he does not eat fresh meat. He likes it stinky. He squatted down, put his hand in his backpack, and pulled out a hacksaw. "I can't carry it all," he explained matter-of-factly. "He is too old for such a burden, and he's growing. He's growing all the time." Then he started screaming at me to run immediately, waving his hands in the hacksaw like a maniac. And I ran. I just ran all the way to the village. Only when I reached the first house on the outskirts did I allow myself to catch my breath. Then, I went straight to our local police officer, Sir Yoga Panzin. I told him everything, starting from the moment I decided to go into the forest. When I finished, I raised my head and looked Sir Yoga in the eyes. I was trying to discern whether he believed me or not. I could not tell if he did or not. He seemed to be caught in thought. I put myself in Sir Yoga's shoes and wondered, what would I think if the school principal, a generally respected man, showed up at my door with a pale face and darting eyes? What would I say if he began telling me that his old friend and colleague, Alexander Maximovich, an equally respected man, was right now dismembering a half-decomposed corpse in the forest? So Yoga finally got up from the table, holstered his service pistol, and said, "Okay, let's go." We drove to the edge of the forest and headed toward the bog. I was terrified, to be honest. I mean, the sight of a dead man sawed into pieces. I did not want to fucking see that. And secondly, if Maximich had gone crazy, who could guarantee he wasn't lurking behind a tree somewhere, waiting for the right moment to slit our throats? Even the presence of an armed law enforcement officer nearby did not calm me down in the least. When we reached the cursed lake, neither the body nor Maximich were there. Sir Yoga began to examine the surroundings, and I glanced around nervously. I could not stop myself from shuddering. All the police officer found were scuff marks on the aspen bark, rope marks, and some flattened moss on the shore. This indicated that something large and heavy had been lying there, nothing more. I suggested that Maximich had pushed the body back into the lake. I also suggested that there must be 2 bodies there, since there were 2 ropes. So Yoga groped blindly in the water with a stick, but found nothing. He cursed and wished that he had a boat hook. We stood silently on the shore for a while. The officer smoked a cigarette and tossed it into the water. He told me we should go back and that he would take care of it. "Let's go back, Victor," he said. "I will take care of this, do not worry." He told me to lock myself in for the night and call him if anything happened. He said he was on his way to see Mac right now. I followed his advice, but it brought me no peace. That night was the longest and most terrifying of my life. My thoughts revolved around Maximich. He was undoubtedly losing his mind. The corpse I saw on the shore of the lake most likely belonged to the old woman who went missing. I could not help but think that he might be the only one behind all the strange deaths and disappearances, but surely he couldn't. I kept the light on all night. My brain kept making me see disturbing images of corpses and figures. I was worried some maniac might be waiting to stab me around a corner. I could not help but think of the insane and cryptic shit that Mac was saying, about it growing and being hungry, and then he told me to run away. I thought he must have truly lost it. My friend was gone. On Sunday, the officer called me. He reported that Maksimich had not spent the night at home and had not shown up in the early morning. He hadn't shown up on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. Curiously, there had been no fires or disappearances in the village during those days. Rumors swirled about Maksimich's disappearance, but the local police officer and I kept silent. Gradually, memories of the terrifying trip to that bog faded into the background, overshadowed by the routine of school life. Now I was more concerned with finding a new biology teacher. I sent a request to the district education department, but I did not expect immediate help, so I called everyone I knew in town. I hoped to find someone part-time who would be willing to teach the graduating classes and come to us at least once a week. In mid-September, Maksimich's daughter visited the village. She had been estranged from her father in the past 2 years, but upon learning that he had disappeared, she finally decided to come. With her consent, the officer broke down the door to the teacher's house. As he himself told me, nothing suspicious was found there. There were no hooks, rusty saws, or butcher's knives hanging on the walls. No jars of alcohol-soaked human organs sat on the shelves in the cellar. No pagan idol smeared with the blood of victims, with gathering dust hidden in the rooms. In short, nothing that could directly, or even indirectly, confirm the elderly teacher's transformation into a dangerous maniac. However, the officer did notice a strange round hole in the earthen floor of the barn, about a meter in diameter, dug at an angle to the ground. He told me that the stench coming from it was foul, the worst he had ever smelled, said it smelled like corpses. Trying to locate the source of the stench, the police officer grabbed a shovel, but even then he only found a dead cat. Then the walls of the pit crumbled, which basically ended the search. It seemed like all the misfortune in the village had stopped. Toward the end of September, our school finally acquired a new teacher. The horrific events weren't exactly forgotten, but they faded into the back of my mind, overshadowed by everyday life. In other words, life went on as it should. That was until one night near the 30th of that month. At first, I heard a crash from my sleep, and a second later, the sofa beneath me suddenly rose and sank again. It was like a boat on a mighty wave. I opened my eyes and looked around, trying to figure out what was going on. The dishes in the kitchen cabinet were still clinking, the chandelier was swinging, and a crack was snaking across one of the window panes. It must be an earthquake, was my thought. I jumped out of bed and glanced mechanically at the clock. It showed 2:30 in the morning. I ran to the window and flung it open. Icy rain splashed my face. I closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, I was dumbfounded. 3 houses on the opposite side of the street stood crookedly, as if a drunken giant had messed with them. Directly beneath the foundation of the buildings ran a narrow, almost straight, long chasm that stretched for about 50 meters, gradually tapering off. I couldn't even try to rationalize this in my mind anymore. Instead of assuming earthquake, my brain jumped straight to something coming from underground. I didn't have time to entertain my crazy thoughts because I heard screams and a woman's heart-rending sobbing. Hastily dressing, I ran out into the street. The shaking seemed to have awakened the neighbors. Lights flickered in the windows of the houses on both sides of the streets, and anxious voices could be heard. Nikolai Petelin, a worker at the local sawmill and father of 4, staggered toward me. His house had suffered more than the others, tilting and sagging. Despite the cold and rain, Nikolai was naked, but that did not particularly matter to him at the moment. Behind Petelin, from the direction of his house, I could hear a woman's monotonous wailing. I realized something had happened and hurried to meet Nikolai. "What happened?" I shouted. Petelin did not react at all, as if he hadn't heard me. Coming closer, he looked up at me. He had this absolutely insane look. I had never seen such eyes before. I felt uneasy and I wanted to back away, but Nikolai grabbed my jacket with both hands. "It ate my children," he squeezed out. It was like he was looking through me. He said it again, and I struggled to process what he was saying. These words made my blood run cold. I grabbed Nikolai by the lapels, shook him, and yelled in his face. I shouted, asking what happened, who ate them. Pietelin did not react, and like a clockwork toy, just kept repeating, it ate my children. We stood there, clutching each other, until another neighbor, Uncle Misha, ran up to us. Although he was already in his 60s, he was a tall and strong man, and so he easily tore Nikolai away from me and entrusted him to his wife. She had just arrived. Uncle Misha asked if I had seen him. I only just now noticed that Uncle Misha had his double-barreled hunting shotgun slung over his shoulder. I didn't understand. See who? Him. Uncle Misha pointed his finger at the fucked up ground, and then pointed to his house, which had also been damaged. I shrugged. Uncle Misha opened his mouth to add something, but immediately, there was a loud crash in the Pietelin house. Someone began wailing mournfully again. Without a word, we rushed there. As soon as I stepped inside, I froze. I was stunned by the scene that greeted me. The walls were warped. There were empty, crooked frames where windows should have been. The floor heaved and was strewn with crumbling plaster, and right in the middle of the room was a huge hole, bristling with broken boards. It smelled horrible, like a freshly dug grave. In the attic somewhere is where I heard the howling and wailing coming from. Misha told me to rush upstairs because it would take him too long. I obeyed and carefully climbed up the attic. I was afraid the stairs were about to collapse. Halfway up the steps, I stopped and looked back. I saw Uncle Misha, rifle at the ready, carefully approach the edge of the pit, peer inside, gasp, and immediately recoil. I did not ask what he saw in there. I was already feeling unbearably creeped out. In the farthest corner of the attic sat Nikolai's wife, Olga. She was clutching her 2 daughters and groaning. Her gaze was vacant, just like her husband's. The children sobbed softly. I just said, hello. I was unable to think of anything smarter to say. I just told them we had to leave, because the house could collapse at any second. The eldest daughter, probably about 14, asked if it was gone. I had no idea what she meant, but I still said yes, and said it was gone. I didn't have time to try and figure out whatever the fuck just happened. I just told them it was all over. Misha shouted at me from below. He told me, don't let them look into the pit. I did not ask why again. When we finally got the mother and children outside, Uncle Misha explained that the mutilated bodies of Pietelin's 3rd daughter and only son lay at the bottom of the pit. Again, I could not believe my ears. I didn't exactly want to see it for myself though. Misha started going on, and to me, it seemed more like crazy ramblings than an explanation. Can you imagine? This thing killed them, chewed them up, spat them out, and then crawled all over them. That's what he said to me. He tried to light a cigarette, but his fingers were shaking and the cigarette wobbled. He told me they looked like they were hit by a combine harvester. I finally just kinda lost it. I started shouting that I didn't understand and to tell me what the fuck was happening. He just looked at me like I was stupid. He was just like, you didn't see him? I just told him no. Misha was about to start talking, but then we heard another horrible cry. Someone was screaming about the earth moving. We both fell silent. I saw the ground heave again, forming a ridge, as if a giant mole were crawling toward the surface. The ground beneath my feet shook. Someone screamed, someone cursed. A child began to loudly cry. The wave of earth rose slowly, but relentlessly, like a tsunami. Then it reached the power pole and crashed against it. The wooden pole swayed and collapsed, illuminating us with a firework of sparks. The lights in the houses went out. The street was plunged into darkness. Silence fell, broken only by the sound of the rain. People froze. It seemed like I stopped breathing in those endless seconds. And in that silence, we heard a new sound. It was a dry clicking sound. It sounded like parrots snapping their beaks. And then I could hear a disgusting, wet squelching sound. And then a wave of stench washed over our noses. The light flickered again. One of the neighbors had brought a powerful flashlight. The beam lit up everything in the radius. People, the fucked up street, and then it finally found the source of the sound. And immediately, with a single burst of terror, we all saw the body of a gigantic worm rising above the ditch. It swayed from side to side. It had numerous sickle-shaped mandibles that were snapping constantly. I genuinely thought I was in a nightmare or something. This fucking thing. It looked exactly like that weird fucking maggot thing that had bitten Maksimich. Only it wasn't tiny like before, it was fucking huge. How the fuck is this possible? This thing was as thick as a 200-liter barrel and towered over us at a height of 3 humans stacked on top of each other. I heard someone stuttering from behind me and I turned. Uncle Misha was standing behind us. Everyone moved the fuck out of the way because Uncle Misha had raised his rifle. He took a few steps forward and pulled both triggers. The sound of a double shot made me flinch, and I was not the only one. The flashlight beam swung, and when it illuminated the worm again, we saw that the monster's body was covered in countless small wounds, oozing black fluid. The buckshot had actually hurt it. The worm snapped its mandibles, writhed, and quickly pulled its body back on the ground. A few seconds later, all that remained was a stinking hole. We all froze in anticipation. Uncle Misha was frantically reloading his gun. His hands were shaking. One of the men brought a long, sturdy pole, the end of which bristled with 2 huge bent nails. We stood there, ready to meet the monster's next appearance. Fortunately, he did not show up. Nor that night, nor the following ones. The village was in turmoil for almost a week, but then, the tension gradually subsided. The Pietelin children's dead were buried, and Nikolai, his wife, and their daughters went to live in the district center. The worm-eaten earth rampart was bulldozed, and the sagging houses were rebuilt. Yes, a few journalists came from the city and interviewed eyewitnesses at length. Not many though, which was, weird. At first there was a rush, and then everything died down almost as quickly. Very quickly after the interviews, the district's main newspaper published a lengthy article. The article was a pile of shit, talking only about karst sinkholes, mass hallucinations, and collective psychosis. The event was effectively buried and forgotten. Journalists did not believe any witnesses, and neither did any other villages. Now, I've been trying to put the pieces together in my head for most of my life. I don't think anyone else connected Mac to the worm, but for me, it was just obvious because of the things he said. The body, him saying it was hungry. Did he feed the fucking thing? Was it the worm that bit him, or was that just an offspring? I have no idea. Why would he do that? Why would he take a corpse and give it to that thing? I only have one theory, and it's a long shot, and it took me many years to even fucking come up with it. I did a lot of asking and a lot of research. Mac was a biologist, so I started looking into things. I learned from someone knowledgeable that there is a little bug called a lumachuza. It's this beetle thing. It can make this chemical substance that is like mind control. It makes the ants eat their own offspring, and it can stop them from attacking. The chemicals that it makes mimics the ants' communication signals, and so they listen to it without thinking. I think this worm thing, whatever it is, can do that. That's the only answer I can find, even if it is fucking crazy. Maybe when that small one bit him, it did something. I don't know. I really don't. I was hoping someone here could tell me, if you even believe me. Otherwise, why would he ever do that? One other thing was when the worm tunneled away. It was moving in a practically straight line, as if it had some goal or destination. It could be coincidence, but if you take a map of our district, trace the monster's path through the village, and then continue along the straight line, it would end up right at the northern end of the town cemetery. The district center is big. We might have been a village, but at the time, we were connected and had others nearby. Lots of visitors. There were a lot of bodies in that grave. If it ate the one that Matt gave it, then I dread to think, maybe it ate all the dead bodies there too. Wherever it went, I don't know. Like I said, it has been many years. Who knows if it has terrorized other remote places, or snatched up who knows who. Hey, I hope you've enjoyed the stories. The goal for the channel is 100k, so please subscribe, like, and leave a comment, because it really helps the channel. Thank you for watching.